Dr. James Lemons graduated from Feinberg in '69, is an internationally recognized expert in neonatology and professor of clinical pediatrics at Indiana University School of Medicine. He has held numerous leadership positions in local, state, and national committees and organizations. Funded by the NIH for over 30 years, he has expertise in basic and clinical research. He has been an invited lecturer or visiting professor at more than 70 universities around the world and is the author of over 300 articles and book chapters. Dr. Lemons has worked internationally in Kenya to enhance the care for women and newborn infants in sub-Saharan Africa, and was responsible for the building of the Riley Mother and Baby Hospital of Kenya, which delivers over 20,000 babies each year. His primary focus is to facilitate the career development of the faculty and fellows of the section of neonatology. Dr. Lemons also directs a program on poverty amelioration and works on social justice issues focused on children and women. Dr. Lemons, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, thanks. Thanks. That was a little more than necessary. Thank you.
You're welcome. But yeah, to get us started with a question, we were wondering if you can kind of talk a little bit about your path in deciding to pursue a career in neonatology and what type of person fits well in that field.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks to each of you for taking time. Yeah, I wish I was more intentional about this. I think you all are far ahead of most of us in our vintage, at least. In thinking about these things, I always advise students and house staff that I'm working with to think about where you might be in another 50 years, so that you can look back and and appreciate that you chose a path that really touches your own heart, and that you think is a path that allow you to make an impact. I was lucky to pick neonatology. I was going to be a general pediatrician. I fell in love with pediatrics my third year at Northwestern, and had a little girl who died of cancer that I was, getting close to. So I loved pediatrics, and then I thought I'd be small town doc, in somewhere in Wisconsin or whatever, and then rotated through the NICU, and especially as an intern at Michigan, and fell in love with the kind of the drama, the intensity. And looking back, I think it was really, a lot of it was the technology, the emergency care that I enjoyed a lot. But reflecting back, I think it was more the relationships that I was able to establish, because in that environment, in the ICU environment, you need to establish trust very quickly, and help, well, I think families helped us more than we helped the families oftentimes in teaching us how we should, walk beside parents and grandparents and uncles and siblings, and in helping learn how best to support families in making sometimes very, very difficult decisions. But I love that, that environment. I love the nursing staff. I love my colleagues, and of course love the families. And only looking back after being in this field for 40, 50 years, did I really appreciate having had the opportunity, and was given the opportunity to to chair a lot of committees, to be in a leadership role where I could speak out on behalf of children and women in particular, in the United States and in the developed West, but also in underdeveloped areas, and usually on behalf of those in the margins. I've learned. I used to think the margins were where the prostitutes are, and and those with, drug issues, maybe the drug dealers, those who are living in poverty, the minority. Now I think I'm in the margins. I think I've learned that where we should be is in the middle of all that. Yeah, I think many of us with white privilege live in the margins probably, and we should be in the thick of it all. That's where life happens, and that's where the NICU I learned is kind of a crucible of life. I think I've learned that the NICU is where one can experience the greatest joys, the greatest sorrows, the greatest tragedies, with every socioeconomic, every religious or not, every ethnicity, every language, every nationality. It's an amazing place to have had the privilege to live and work in a children's hospital in the NICU for this long. And yeah, I've been really blessed. I just wish I was more intentional about picking, the field. I picked it probably for reasons that may not have been so altruistic and so meaningful, but I think I just followed my own kind of heart, was led there by great mentors along each step of the way, thankfully. And yeah, and look back now at how amazing that journey has been. Yeah,
Thank you.
you guys feel free to interrupt me and ask me any questions. As I said, you have a whole a whole textbook of questions here that we could spend a couple days on probably.
Yeah, if anyone wants to unmute themselves. Oh, sorry, Nina, go ahead.
No, you're totally good. Dr. Lemons, you mentioned you have to establish trust very quickly in the NICU. I was just wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about that. I feel like as medical students, we're always like curious, like how do you actually establish trust with patients in a quick manner?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question, and lots of ways, I guess, to talk about that. I think it comes down to, I think, genuine caring, and to me, that's where the joy of medicine comes from. I personally don't believe there should be burnout in medicine, and it seems like every month we have another grand rounds or another lecture on burnout anymore. It makes me sad. But I think looking back, I think it's, it comes from empathy. It comes from compassion. Compassion, we say, is, I read a great definition of compassion, which was different than others that I'd seen. It says it's the recognition of the interconnectedness of all things. And where that might not explicitly be compassion, I think it's a requisite for truly, I think, realizing how vulnerable we are. I always suggest to the students and staff and nurses to watch the TED Talk by Brene Brown on vulnerability. If you haven't watched it, it's 20 minutes of really entertaining, very profound insight, I think, into vulnerability, and it teaches us humility. So one of my favorite quotes by Ram Dass, he's kind of a new age philosopher. He's the one who said, "We are simply walking each other home." And I love that mind's eye view of our journey here on life, on earth, and I used to think, boy, it's endless, but as I say, I'm on the back nine, and I know we're mortal. But I think it's through recognizing that we can learn from everyone, embracing the diversity that's there. And if you really love being with people and being able to help and realizing we're really learning our whole life. I think, just sitting, I always tell the new house staff, I work, so we have a dozen NICUs in our program around the city and state that our faculty manage. So we take care of maybe 10,000 newborns a year in Indiana in the intensive care arena. And the two I've always loved working in are our children's hospital here. We have a 60-bed, like you guys have at Northwestern, a maximum care unit with the most complex. And then right across the street, we have a county hospital that was given to Indianapolis in about 1850. And it's a brand new $750 million complex now, just replaced the old Wishart Hospital. It's called Eskenazi. And it's dedicated to care for the poor of Indianapolis. And it's amazing. It has a urban farm on the 7th floor, raises all the produce for the cafeteria and the cafe that's there. So $750 million state-of-the-art complex to care for the poor. So I love to work there, and that's where I'm doing all my NICU this year. And so, you're with people who are 100% of them, the patients are in poverty. And they are from the fringes, they a lot of immigrant refugees from every country, South America, Central America, Africa, Eastern Europe, often don't speak English. So you're captive to your own native tongue in such a vulnerable, scary environment with a sick newborn, don't know the rules, don't know the language. How can you? And so trying to empathize with that, getting on I tell house staff, you need to get if a mom is laying down in bed and you're counseling her, first get her partner on the phone if they can't be there, if it's a husband or the father, or it could be a lesbian couple. I said, if they're laying down, then you should be on your knees at eye level. And sorry, you're going to make me cry because, I was just talking to actually a woman from the Congo who had a baby deliver over the weekend with anencephaly. And she didn't speak English. She just spoke Swahili. So we had interpreters. And anyway, she hadn't even told her husband of the diagnosis. And the baby was born stillbirth. But trying to, make that bridge and understand in each case where a mother in this case and father are coming from. They had lost 2 of their 4 kids to malaria. I always think it's taking. I always tell the house staff to go in and the students to go in and spend a couple of minutes, maybe 10 minutes, just listening to the rest of the story. Just learning a little bit about their journey. In poverty. What does it mean? Read a little bit about poverty. It's a great, simple book called The Understanding the Framework of Poverty by Ruby Payne, which gives language to this generational poverty and a bit of insight into how behaviors might be established, and that we often judge or stereotype, and we shouldn't be judging that. So taking time just to learn a little bit about their journey and then leaving with a word of kindness. Just say something kind. And I tell them, that may be the first kind thing that young woman in poverty may have ever heard from a professional, especially a white physician. And so saying something kind, just a little bit of love. So that's where I get the wellspring, I think, and sometimes it's very hard. You have a baby die, like in this case, but it's just the privilege of walking beside that family that fills me up. And I think everybody should be filled up with that, the privilege of learning again, how to be a little bit better listener, how you can care a little more. see. Sorry, I always get so teary when I think about these personal, sorry, 1,000 stories pop up. I should be better, but everybody knows I think it's good to share tears, as long as you're not paralyzed, of course, by the tears. But demonstrating, we learned long ago. We wrote a little paper called "Becoming a Good Doctor," and from the neonatology perspective. But learned a long time ago that caring and expressing caring is desirable by most all patients. You want to be giving them the very best medical care, of course, and being open and honest. But there are different ways of sharing that. I'm going on quite a long time here, trying to answer your question. But trust comes from, I think, creating a safe space for whoever walks into our care without judgment, as they are. And I always try to teach to begin with the strengths. So don't, expect or create a bar there that you start with somebody's weakness. You should always start with somebody's strength, build upon that, and then you gradually maybe can help deal with some of the other concerns. But and not underestimating what we can do. So, I look back in a children's hospital. I gave the last lecture here a few years ago. Each year, somebody's invited to give a last lecture, and I called it "The Unanticipated Consequences of Love," because I thought, gosh, we grew up in a children's hospital. We live here, and we never talk about love. And here we're surrounded by parental, grandparental, uncle, sibling love. And we should be harnessing that for that child. And it doesn't have to be a children's hospital, but in an adult hospital, love is often part of the fabric here, and we don't really kind of include that in our healing. And in our learning, and we should be, I think. I've always thought the one thing that's always bugged me about medicine from the very start is the visitor tags. So, especially in a children's hospital, we have parents wear a visitor tag. And I think how backwards and upside down that is, of anybody that's in the children's hospital that needs to be with their sick child, it's the parent, of course. And yet we make the parents wear a visitor's badge. Each year I ask the administration, I said, one day a year, why don't you have all of us, the social workers, the housekeeping people, the clerks, the doctors, the nurses, wear a visitor tag just one day to remind us who's visiting here, and we often have restrictive visiting hours, etc. It's all backwards, that immediately sets a different mindset or tone or heart set, I call it. But that we need to be engaged in learning from those that we're privileged to help care for. But being non-judgmental is a key part of building trust. But boy, it's a tough journey to learn to be non-judgmental, because we all have our little biases. And I think we recognize that in this day and age with all this racism and white supremacy. I talk about Trump and Pence and McConnell on rounds, and I try to make it apolitical. But I always emphasize, I said, what our children are seeing here and our grandchildren are seeing here is the antithesis of everything we should value in medicine. And it reminds me, mentors, mentors can be good and mentors can be bad, and trying to select out but naming it all the time and speaking out about it is really critical. And I don't mean to get into political areas, but it's a time when we should not be silent, and especially in the medical arena. You all will have positions of influence in medicine, and it's still the most highly respected position. It's still the greatest profession of all. I think especially academic medicine, but I know everybody's not headed for academics, but to be able to have a position where one can speak with influence and have a conversation with most people. I don't think all people. Some conversations are almost impossible anymore, but I'm digressing a lot, which I tend to do. And sometimes I get resident evaluations that my rounds are a little too long with too many stories. So, but I think trying to teach ourselves non-judgmental love and inclusivity is a key part of trust, and people can tell when you genuinely care. I have lots of stories about that, but I'll pause here. Thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. That was a really thoughtful response and definitely gave us probably a lot to think about too.
Thanks. I don't know if you want me to pick a question, or if anybody has a priority question, please.
Yeah, you can pick a question. I guess one that I had that was also on here was kind of how you started working in Kenya and how that kind of came about.
Sure, and that's been one of the big gifts to me and my family, my wife and family. So when I was in Northwestern, two of my best friends were Jewish. So they asked the administration in the med school if we could organize our schedules to get 6 months off, because my two friends wanted to go to Israel and work in Tel Aviv at Beilinson Hospital for 4 months. So they asked me, why don't you join us? And I said, well, let me see what I can do. And so somebody told me to apply for a grant from the Presbyterian Church, because I grew up Presbyterian in Oak Park, actually. Went to Oak Park High School. And so I applied for this grant, and I got a grant to go to Ethiopia for 4 months. And it wasn't even in a town; it was in the bush, along a branch of the Nile River called the Baro River. Huge 22-foot crocodiles all over, big Nile perch. I got to go there for 4 months to live with two families, two surgeons and their families. And they built this little clinic next to 20 miles from a little town. So it was one of those other. I wish I again was more intentional and more mature. I think I was really naive and young, but I went and had a great adventure as a young person, and then I was a dangerous third-year medical student. I was between third and fourth year, so didn't know very much, but boy, I saw so much. And I think I kind of learned, that taking a risk, there's a book called The 5 Secrets You Need to Know Before You Die. And a man interviewed a lot of older people like me and categorized them as either content or not with their journey so far. And one of those secrets was the people who were not content wished they'd taken the jump, the leap, wished they had taken the risk. They regretted that. And I learned, I think, when I went to Ethiopia back, of course, even flying planes that far was still a risk. I didn't really worry about any of that, but I think I appreciated that taking a risk is not all that it's cut out to be. It's where we should have, when we land there, we find out that's where we should have been in the first place. Why were we afraid to do that? So I always encourage all young people to travel internationally if they can, to travel, especially to a developing country if they possibly can. It'll break down all those fears for parents to take their kids on these adventures. So anyway, so after that, I went to Israel for a couple of weeks, and then I have an uncle family in Switzerland, and he loaned us a Land Rover, and we hiked around Southern Europe for 2 months, and then came back. So it was a great exposure to life back then. And then I got married, and my wife she wasn't into this, travel to developing countries. She loved Nordstrom's a lot more. But we have 3 kids, and when our 2 youngest kids were in high school, our oldest one was just going off to kind of rebelling in college. And unfortunately, he didn't go with us. But my wife said, it's time, we got to do something like this. So that's when I found out about the Indiana University Kenya partnership that had started in 1990. And so we found that they could use us for 3 months. It was perfect for our 2 kids because we wanted something for our kids to do. And they taught at a school that an African Kenyan couple had built because they had adopted 35 kids and they needed a school. And now there were almost 700 kids in this school up to high school. And the next year they opened the freshman year in high school. And so our kids got to teach there. It was just half a mile up the mud road. And Pam and I got to work. I was the team leader for the whole program back there. It was the 4th year for 3 months. So it was unbelievable opportunity. And it was because of, I think, our meeting several Kenyan faculty. We might have had a half a dozen Kenyan faculty then. Now we have several hundred Kenyan faculty there. I don't know how many, probably, I don't know, 10,000 Kenyans have graduated from that medical school that we helped start there. It became a holistic program, the best HIV treatment prevention program probably in all of Africa. Holistic with food security, water security, women's rights, children's rights. And I've gotten involved in several different programs now. It's unbelievable. I probably have more friends there than anywhere in the world, but I only get to see them an hour, maybe a year. Because every year we go back at least once, and so I've been there maybe 35 times. And we actually, because of that experience, I think we had a tiny room there that was a nursery and didn't have any clean water, didn't have any running water, actually had an oxygen tank, but had been empty for a year and a half, and usually 20 preterm babies there, and most of them died. My wife worked there. I worked on the pediatric wards, oftentimes, 3 or 4 kids to a bed. But I'm chuckling because we had such great relationship with these kids, and parents often had great senses of humor, great perspective. And anyway, I think that planted the seed that I wanted to build something for them. And so eventually we raised $3 million and built the Mother Baby Hospital. We named it after our children's hospital here. James Whitcomb Riley's a Hoosier, Indiana National Poet Laureate. And the hospital here is named after James Whitcomb Riley. So we named the Riley Mother Baby Hospital of Kenya, and just to have a permanent academic partnership. And so that started our love for just the people in Kenya. It wasn't, we could have been in, Nigeria, we could have been in India, wherever, China. Anyway, that just, I think, broke down a lot of barriers and established some real genuine caring for each other. And so every year I've been back, I appreciate Kenyan leadership. So in fact, I look for Kenyan leadership. Usually it's a woman who knows what the problem is there that needs to be solved, and if given a little help, can solve it. So that's how our partnerships kind of grew. From the very beginning of the IU Kenya partnership, it was leading with care. So clinical care was first. Second was training and teaching. And third was research. So those three legs of the stool have always been a critical part of our partnership. There's nothing even close, I think, to this relationship between Indiana University and Moi University in Kenya. There were 4 faculty that started it here, 1 pediatrician and 3 internists, and they committed when they decided this is what they were going to do, help start a medical school, a second medical school in Kenya. They promised to live there for a year at a time, simply to support the Kenyan leadership in teaching the students and beginning the school. And they let Kenyans, well, they just supported Kenyan leadership to lead the way. And that's how, the ugly American has a long history of thinking we know how to fix problems. And there's the saying, give a man a fish, feed him for a day, teach him to fish, feed him for a lifetime. I thought of one more that may be even better, and that's to build and stock a clean pond in which to fish in perpetuity. So that creates sustainability in perpetuity. When you have leadership that's built a school for themselves, could be a medical school, nursing school, engineering school, primary school. That's how the Jesuits have done it all over the world, creating institutions of higher learning and of excellence. But that's a stocked pond that's clean water, is for them, in this case the Kenyans, to build a school that they run and teach themselves for themselves. And that's I cry again. That's sustainable excellence, sustainable love. That's the unanticipated consequences of love. Something always happens, but it's hard to anticipate what it'll be. But if it's based on care, genuine caring and kindness or love, then that's sustainable and that will live forever. So we ended up now with that. Mother Baby Hospital opened in 2009. It's a small hospital, but they are delivering almost 20,000 mothers. The NICU was built for about 30, and we have about 130 average daily census now. We need to expand. We actually have a neonatologist that just came on board about 15 months ago. A woman who's from near there, a Kenyan woman who finished her fellowship in South Africa and joined there. And she has 2 sets of twins. I think they're 12 and 6 now herself. And she is the best of the best, and finally has given us, and they're going to try to start a neonatology fellowship next year there to train their own neonatologists. Subspecialty. We started a pediatric residency there about 16 years ago. One of our other neonatologists was there with his wife for a year and started that. We have an internal medicine residency, now surgery residency, OB-GYN residency, family practice residency. And now we're beginning to hear talk of, different subspecialties. So it's, one of my favorite quotes is if you can complete it in your lifetime, it's not worth starting. That's probably a pretty good place to begin. Yeah. So, sorry, I know I'm going on. But that's how we began. We became engaged in Kenya. It's been the greatest gift to us. Who would have thought we could have? People told me I was crazy when I said we're going to build a women's hospital that's going to be a place of beauty for patients. One of the best. We were over there with our son, who didn't go to Kenya the first time, for the dedication of the hospital, and there were 2 great things happened. One was after the dedication, we went up to the postpartum floor and sat there with some of the women and nurses, and the nurses said, "Boy, we've had women of wealth, 0.01% of the population who decided to come and deliver there because they saw how beautiful the facility was. And when they left, they were shocked because they were charged such a pittance. They were given one fee for everybody. And then they said, but so many of the women came in, and when they were situated in the, labor and delivery, and then the postpartum, they were angry because they thought they were being put on the private wing. So most hospitals in developing countries, there's a private wing or a private hospital, and they charge a lot more, of course, to be on the private wing. Well, and then they wept because the nurses said, no, everybody's the same here. And it was, finally, everybody's treated equally there. And that's equality, that's equal, truly equal and fair. And then the other part of that was there was a businessman that we somehow lucked into who owns a construction company. He has two sons who run it now, both with a master's degree from England. And I see them every time I go over. I spend an hour there just because I kind of fell in love with this older gentleman who's now retired, semi-retired, and it's called Vishva Construction, and Ramji is his name, Vicaria. So the day after the dedication, I asked Ramji to come over because he had built this hospital. It was the first health facility he had built. So we toured the hospital from the top floor, third floor, where we have kind of a hostel for 50 women in the boardroom, 50 women that have babies in the NICU. Now we need 150 rooms, and then the second floor, it came down to the first floor where the NICU was. And we went back to the NICU, and already the first day there were, 20 or babies in the NICU. And so we had these isolettes with these little preemies there. And then the mothers were there pumping their breast, expressing milk. And he stood there and it got very quiet. And finally I turned to him, and he's this tough Indian businessman. And here he is with a tear rolling down his cheek. And I turned back, gave him a minute. I turned back to him and he said, now I see what I have built. Yeah. I cry again. So they have now built warehouses for Samaritan's Purse, and it changed their whole way that they looked at their construction business all over Kenya now. So I go and see them every year and just sit with them and talk for an hour in their office. And we talk about how the sons they've got master's degree in economics and business from London. But I said, you got your real education from this man, your dad, who also he learned him, self-taught by seeing what he had built and really understanding what it meant for thousands and thousands, and, tens of thousands now, couple 100,000 women have been able to safely deliver their babies, in a very nice place, and faculty can teach there, and students can learn there, and see, I start crying every time I go through, rethink these amazing stories that we've been blessed with, and the friendships that we have. Who would have thought? Yeah. So I need a Kleenex, sorry. But that's been an amazing journey, and people say, why are you working in Kenya? A lot of people in our church, we belong to a 4,000 member church here, a fair number of conservative element, people, but they're learning more and more, and understand how we're all in this together. But I often get asked, why are you doing this in Kenya? I said, no, we do it a lot right here. They teach us more. There's another partnership I work on called the Emoja Project. It means united. And we support, started off interfaith here, supporting 19 primary schools in a rural part of Western Kenya near Lake Victoria. And of those, in those schools, there are about 6,000 kids. 3,400 of them are orphans, over half, mostly HIV. This is our 12th year. We started a girls empowerment program early on, where girls are taught about themselves. You know, it used to be pregnancy, rape, and some people have said female, you know, oppression and incest and rape and sexual molestation. 90% maybe experienced. We used to see, you know, a dozen pregnancies a year. Now we've had one in the last 5 years. Started a food security program, lunch program, where these 3,400 kids are fed lunch of maize and beans. And we have one big purchase of maize and beans for about $40,000, $50,000 each year. And they use it to feed the kids, you know, all year long. I can't tell you, I don't know how many kids now have graduated college, probably at least a couple hundred. And many are coming back to mentor these kids back. It has become known, it's all led by 3 people, one teacher who retired from the government. He's got 4 young kids. He left his secure government position and he leads this program with 2 others who are social workers, an orphan man who's 33 and has 2 kids now, and another social worker, Linda Salasia, who has now 4 kids. But those 3 lead this whole program supporting 3,400 orphans and all of the problems in between. They've organized one teacher at each of the 19 schools to be the link teacher that looks after the orphans in that school. And then there are about 1,600 guardians who are uncles, grandparents, just volunteers in the villages who look after 1 or 2 orphans and have them often keep them in their home. So we have this infrastructure, this safety net that has built up, and this community has fundamentally changed and is recognized all over Western Kenya now as the model for what, you know. So I was over there last year and with Pam, and she was teaching yoga to the high school kids. And I was meeting with these guardians, and they have a president and a secretary. And this little old lady is a president, and she gets up and she says at the end, she says, Jim, how we've raised, they all donate about a quarter each time, you know, 25 shillings, Kenya shillings, each time they meet, and they say, we're going to raise by the end of this year $7,000 equivalent. She said, do you think you could find a matching donor back in Indianapolis for that? And I said, absolutely, we can. He said, what would you like to do with that? She said, we want to start an endowment so that every child here will always have access to a moja and to an education. I came back here and told our board that, and we had actually just met with a member of our church who does, you know, major gifting, major donors. And I talked to Charlie and asked him to begin thinking about how we can do a capital campaign, which we're going to start here in the next month, to raise hopefully $3 or $4 million to begin endowment for this. But I told our board the dream of these guardians to build an endowment starting with $7,000. So every kid can have a dream. Yeah, there's another great TED Talk. Yeah, so we squash the dreams of our children all over the world. You know, every child has a gift, and I think it's our job to, you know, like Disraeli said, the best teacher is the teacher who reveals that person's gift to themselves. That's a great teacher, and that's our job. So there's a story. If you do TED.com and search for William, it'll pop up. I think William Kamkwamba. So it's the boy who harnessed the wind. I don't know if you've ever. There's a book about him. But I first heard his TED Talk when he was probably 25, and he tells the story in this broken English of how when he was little, probably 10, he never was educated, no schools around. So he couldn't speak English or read. He said somehow his uncle got him into a library about 100 kilometers from where they lived in this little village in rural Malawi. And when he was there, he looked at this English American high school physics book. And he looked at the pictures. So he goes back to his village and he starts building this contraption outside of his parents' hut. And pretty soon he's known as the village idiot. And the chief almost ostracizes him and kicks him out. The parents almost kick him out, but he persists. And he said the day came a few weeks later, and there was a drought, by the way, and a famine there. So the day comes, he built this old makeshift ladder out of bicycle parts and vine, and sticks. And he said he climbs up to the top and he undid a strap. And the wind's blowing and it starts to turn. It's a windmill. And he eventually used that windmill to pump water from the river to save the crops. But that day, he said, he came halfway down the ladder and he put two wires together and lit a light bulb. A little light bulb up. He became the village hero. Everybody wanted a light bulb so they could begin reading and studying and learning. And eventually reporters heard about this and they flew him to Oxford, England to give the TED Talk. But that's the creative genius that exists. I wrote the statement for the American Academy of Pediatrics on universal newborn hearing screening. I got to chair a task force when I was chairing another committee. They asked me to do this. So I wrote this statement and got all the evidence. We had all the evidence and got to travel all over the world, Western world, to present to governments, the science of hearing screening, universal newborn hearing screening. So by law now, every country in the West does that. We got to play on the old course in Scotland too. And when I love to play golf, so we got to, there were perks to this. Well, a couple of years ago, I saw on Facebook a young man, 26 years old, who was an engineer, and he was Kenyan. And he was holding up his hand with a glove on it. And the story was he had a niece who was profoundly hearing impaired, was deaf essentially. He couldn't communicate with her. She knew sign language. So as an engineer in Kenya, he built this glove that connected with Bluetooth, the tips of the fingers, so that when she wore that glove and did sign language, it spoke Swahili to him. It was the prototype of a glove. And it came from a young man in rural Kenya. So, all these, if we just watch and sense and see what's possible and allow our children to dream and don't stifle their dreams. Even here, we stifle too many kids' dreams. We just don't dream big enough. We should give permission rather than, use our educational systems to channel these kids. We should look for ways that we can allow these kids to give their gifts of music or poetry, or, if every kid had a camera or a pencil or a paintbrush or whatever, we could unleash these gifts to our creation instead of what's happening, now with our teaching hatred to our kids, white supremacy. When that policeman knelt on George Floyd's neck, I was thinking, as tragic as all that is, what happened to permit that child to grow up to be that policeman? How did we allow that to happen? What in our world did we miss here? And we got to start back at the beginning here with the roots of this and call it out and name it and begin teaching and loving each other and caring for each other in ways that are, that are real. But that's why I think that's what medicine is about. That's what being a good doctor is. It's just having permission to care and being encouraged. Our promotion systems in the academic worlds, I always talk about, the grounds for promotion. We need to think of new ways to allow people to be recognized, especially in academic centers, for talking to kids in a high school, for being on the radio, and speaking out about these kinds of issues that we need to promote the good, but it has to be direct and it takes a lot of time sometimes, but to speak about racism now is really critical. We've had 2 of our faculty, and we have about 50 faculty in our division, and 2 gave us the most amazing talks and insights into being Black. One is married to a white physician, and Levi's married to a Black teacher. But their experience and what they've had to go through and suffer through, it's just mind-boggling. It's just I think I'm aware of a lot of this. I ran a class at our church for 10 years called Faith in Action. It was one of the biggest gifts to me. So we probably had 400 speakers over those 10 years and about every issue in life. And it takes time, but I found out I couldn't stop doing it. For every 4 Sundays, we would have 4 people speak, on poverty or homeless or addiction or mental health or gun control or, death penalty or whatever. We had about 80 or 90 topics, we usually 4 Sundays. And I always started with somebody who walked through it. So I found a woman who was African-American getting her degree in theology and divinity at our small seminary here. We have a very eclectic ecumenical seminary here, Christian Flag Seminary. But we have Muslims there and Jews there, and it's really amazing. Anyway, she gave a talk on domestic violence and spoke about what repeated violent rape was. I thought I knew a little bit about rape. I found out I knew nothing about rape. We did and then the next time we had the expert at at our shelter here, violence shelter, Julian Center, and then we'd have the superintendent of police speak about it and so on. So we'd have 4 different perspectives, but we always started with the person. So we did a series on trafficking. So I found a woman whose parents were both professors at a university here in Indiana, and she was about to go on the Johnny Carson's show and was trafficked into Japan. She wrote a book about it eventually, but she told us what trafficking was. I thought I knew. I thought I knew what poverty was. I found out I knew nothing about poverty or the death penalty, or homelessness or children with addiction. But that's where you learn that, and that's the privilege medicine offers us. And no matter which path you take. I like to try to convert everybody into neonatology, of course, but I think if one looks at it like that, learning the medicine for sure and being excellent at the medicine, but then, learning our own vulnerability, making sure we learn humility quickly in medicine because we all make mistakes. And I remember before I was married, I was in the ER in Michigan as an intern, and I remember during the diarrhea season, I remember all the women that I advised to let their toddlers air dry for 48 hours so they didn't get a diaper rash while they were having profuse diarrhea. And I think back and think, I hope not one of those women listened to a word I said, because I could picture all these family rooms with diarrhea all over. And so we all make mistakes, and sometimes very serious mistakes. But I think learning that vulnerability, caring for our patients and their families, and getting to know them a bit, and then helping teach us how to be better listeners, better lovers in a way, to care more deeply. I know oftentimes I have nursing students that come through, and I always like to have young people shadow with me. And some will say, I just can't go into pediatrics because I care too much. I cry. I said, you cannot care too much. You know, that's what we're supposed to be about. It's just as humans, but especially in medicine, we see those vulnerable parts of humanity, and the great strengths also that are revealed sometimes in these journeys. That just are many are broken, but many teach us new ways to not just to survive, but to flourish. And the goodness that can come out of these sometimes very, very difficult. I always tell young people, house staff, I said, you have to ask the hard questions. You can't skirt, why is there suffering? Why do children die? Innocent children suffer and die. I said, those are questions that you have to ask and put in some context that makes sense for you, because our journey, Rumi is a great poet from the 13th century, and he's the one who said, the wound is where the light enters. And we all are wounded along the journey. But it's how do we either absorb that light inside and keep it dark, or do we reflect that light back in ways that illuminate? Do we see better from the wound or not? Anyway, I know I'm digressing into different paths, but I think oops, there's a chat here too that I'm missing, and I don't know. I don't know the time. Have I run out of time already? Or?
Well, there's no such thing as running out of time. I know I could listen to you for another 10 hours. We usually keep these. We are at an hour, and that's what we keep these to.
Vic, I'm sorry, Vic is on, by the way. I missed that, but yeah, thank you, Vic.
No, Vic got engaged in another call earlier, but
okay.
Gosh, I do think that if we do have to wrap up, the wound is where the light enters is a pretty great.
I just add one other from a great. So Parker Palmer is a current modern day, maybe our best theologian in Christianity. And he said he went through deep depression and himself, and he's written books about that. But he said, you hope when you encounter the wound, it can either break your heart apart or it can break it open. It's another great way to think about it then. And I'll just leave with one other. We have a theologian in residence at our church who, when he came, he grew up very conservative and ended up very inclusive. And he's becoming well known all over the world. He's written prolifically, but his basic tenet is he calls it the plurality of truth. And so real quickly, so the first class he gave us, he said, well, in Christianity alone, not to mention Muslim and Jewish and Islam, etc., and Sikh and so on, he said there are 25,000 mini denominations in Christianity. Everybody thinks they've found the path to truth, He said, but we'll never get to the big truth with our limited, human minds and so on. And he said, well, wouldn't it be interesting to think of the ongoing creation? So biodiversity is a natural part of evolution. How about thought diversity, cognitive diversity? Maybe that's part of the intentional evolution and by our creator to increase the diversity of thought and of humanity. You said, wouldn't it be interesting if we actually learn to embrace each other's diverse and different thoughts? It's kind of like the 6, blind men and the elephant. In this case, we have 25,000. He said, maybe collectively we might get a little closer to understanding and approaching the big truth. So I brought him down to Riley and made rounds in the NICU on our team one time, because we had several families who were choosing different paths than were ordinary. So one was a baby with trisomy 18 that they pursued her, quote, heroic surgeries and interventions, and the baby lived for 4 months because of repair of a meningomyelocele and hydrocephalus, and then found to have an esophageal atresia, weighed 1,500 grams, that was repaired, and several others. And the staff were chagrined by this, because we always think we don't want to be doing something to a child. It must always be for a child. Well, it turns out that the dad was a professor of math at Indiana University. Mom was a high-end IT person with the Defense Department. They had 6 other kids. And they understood all the options, from, not giving food or water and allowing their child to die peacefully. That was a little girl. Or proceeding on to have more time, they felt, for their other children to know their sister before she died. They knew she was going to die prematurely. It's a futile situation most all the time. So I brought John Frankie down to listen to these. And I said, we had meetings with the staff, and eventually when it came around to me, I said, so here we have parents who seem to be very bright and understand all their options. They've all been presented to them. And they seem to really love their baby. I said, so how is it that we think we might know better than parents' love for their own child? So I always say lead with love. And if we follow that, that's why, so arrogant and presumptuous, I think, for people, even with things like abortion, even though, people through faith have a very fixed belief. Somebody said, belief is easier than judgment. So who are we to know in a family that makes a decision for an abortion out of love in their family? And I always tell parents, I said, you only go around once. I said, if you are making this decision out of love for your child, then that's the right decision. And you can never go back to second guess it. You're making the best decision you can out of the best premise, out of love. You can't get better than that. So as we come to judge all of these absolutes in our world, I always fall back on love and think if we could, but Mr. Rogers said love is the hardest thing in the world to understand. And it is. But that's because of our 25,000 diverse, and if we could just begin learning better from each other and respecting that. So I call it the plurality of love, it can be the plurality of truth, but the plurality of love. And that's as close as I think we can get right now. And that's how I put things in better context from my understanding of how these things can happen. And I like to support and nurture a parent's love for their child and let that lead the way. So I'll stop there. That's probably, yeah.
So well said. And Dr. Lemons, thank you so much for not just only taking the time to be with us tonight. I think this was such a gift to everybody, clearly, but thank you for all that you do and the way that you do it. And I've done 85 of these. There's never been so much humanity and love in one of our conversations. So
Thank you.
And I want to thank everybody for joining. I want to thank Nonye for leading the discussion. I want to encourage you guys to join us next week. We have 2 great APFs. We have our very own Dr. Rupal Kundu and her 2 sisters. That's an APF first, okay? And another announcement just went out about an hour ago for next Wednesday, Dr. Connie Manella for correctional medicine, which is also an APF first. So hope to see you guys on the screen soon. Dr. Lemons, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan, for the privilege of being with you. And thanks to all the students. And thanks,
Thank
Vic.
you. Of course, thank you.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Good to
Thank
see you,
you.
Dr. Lemons.
It
Okay.
was a privilege. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Have a great night.
Thanks,
Bye.
Nanye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you were a great host.
Oh, thank you.
Good.
Felt very good to be here. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.